Are there any senators in the chamber wishing to vote or change their vote? If not, on this vote, the ayes are 99, the nays are 0. The amendment is agreed to.
Mr. President.
Senator from Montana.
Mr. President, I ask consent to speak in morning business.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I rise today to highlight the importance of agriculture and celebrate National Agriculture Week. President Dwight D. Eisenhower once said, "Farming looks mighty easy when your plow is a pencil when you're 1,000 miles away from the cornfield." This week reminds us that it's our job to bridge the gap between plowing fields and crafting laws and make sure our ranchers and farmers have the tools they need. In my home state of Montana, agriculture is the heart and soul of our economy. It is an essential part of who we are. In Montana, agriculture is not simply a livelihood, it's our way of life. Growing up on a ranch outside of Helena taught me firsthand the values of hard work, faith, family, and doing what's right. Values I try to bring with me to work every day. 50% of Montana's economy is tied to farming and ranching, 50%. And 1 in 5 Montana jobs is tied in some way to agriculture. It's our #1 industry. Each year, Montana ranchers and farmers produce nearly $3 billion of the highest quality agriculture goods produced anywhere in the world. As a nation, we are blessed with a safe, affordable, and abundant food supply. Our farmers and ranchers in our country put food on the tables of families around the world, and they help create good-paying jobs here at home. Every year, the average American feeds 155 people worldwide. Stands in the spotlight this week. It is critical to remember the words of President Eisenhower and recognize the needs of our ranchers and farmers every day throughout the year. Next week, I'll be holding a series of listening sessions across Montana to discuss the next Farm Bill. I did that last time around. They were terrific. I learned so much by having these listening sessions all across our state. I'll be starting Monday in the eastern part of Montana in towns of Forsyth and Miles City. And over the next year, I'll work my way across the state collecting ideas and information from Montana farmers and ranchers to make sure that the next Farm Bill works for them. I'm lucky to represent so many ranchers and farmers in our state who have dedicated their life to the land. It's so important. It roots us in our state. It grounds us. I'm proud to honor these folks today during National Agriculture Week. President, I yield the floor.
It's right now. Okay.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Indiana.
Mr. President, I ask for unanimous consent to dispense with the quorum call, and I ask consent for the
Without
Senate
objection.
to proceed just to a period of morning business with senators permitted to speak up for 10 minutes each.
Without objection. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. President.
Senator from Illinois,
As consent, the quorum call be suspended.
without objection.
And it's my understanding we are in morning business.
Senator is correct.
Mr. President, this week we're considering legislation on the Senate floor that affects small business. I want to talk about another issue very important to small business, and it's the topic of interchange fees, known as swipe fees. Last week, nearly 200 small businesses came to Washington, D.C., from Illinois and from all across America. They came to stand up in support of reform of the interchange fee, the swipe fee, that Congress passed last year. They came to stand up to the major credit card companies, Visa and MasterCard, and the $13 trillion banking industry that's doing everything in its power to reverse this reform. Small businesses, we all know, are the key to our economy and its future. We need for them to be able to grow, to hire more workers and serve their customers well. But debit card swipe fees set by Visa and MasterCard on behalf of the big bank allies are crushing many small businesses. Back in 2009, the banks made over $16 billion per year in debit swipe fees, about $1.3 billion per month. Now, $16 billion may not sound like a lot of money when you compare it to the $20.8 billion that the New York State Comptroller said was paid out in Wall Street bonuses to major financial institutions just last year, but it's a huge amount when it affects small business. For most Americans on Main Street, $16 billion in swipe fees is quite a lot. This money comes out of the pockets of small business owners across America and out of the pockets of their customers who pay higher prices for gas and groceries as a result. According to data from the Federal Reserve and the Nielsen Report, over half of all debit interchange fees, more than $8 billion per year, goes to just 10 giant banks. What it boils down to is this. Some who are pushing for a delay in this reform are literally offering a handout of $16 billion to the biggest banks in America. The swipe fee system does not have transparency and no competition. The bottom line is the current debit card system in this country is a broken market. Ask any retailer, large or small, hotel owner, restaurant owner, convenience store owner, gas station. Ask them what bargaining power they have when it comes to the amount they're charged for the use of a debit card. And the answer is none. Ask them how much is being paid in each transaction, and the answer is it's secret. Now, is that how you would build an economy? With no competition and no transparency? That is exactly what's going on with the duopoly of Visa and MasterCard imposing these fees on small business. The banks and card companies are sending an army of lobbyists to Congress to undo the reform that Congress passed last year. There are hundreds of bankers swarming over Capitol Hill just this week. Several members who have never supported interchange reform in the first place have introduced legislation to delay that reform that we passed. I'm sorry to say that this plays right into the banking industry's effort to avoid accountability. I want my colleagues to know that small businesses are going to tell their side of the story, too. Todd McCracken is the president of the National Small Business Association. He came to Capitol Hill last week, and this is what he said. Small businesses aren't trying to do away with credit and debit cards. We just want them to play by the rules. Small businesses have been at the mercy of these large banks for years, and the swipe fee reforms merely inject fairness and transparency into a market that has been dictated by a handful of companies for years. Mr. President, hundreds of small businesses also submitted formal comments to the Federal Reserve in support of reform. Those comments are posted at the Federal Reserve's website. I'd like to read a few of those from my home state of Illinois. Nolan Williamson runs a flower shop. It's called Jerry's Flower Shop in Carbondale, Illinois. I think there's also a Carbondale, Colorado. But Carbondale, Illinois, in southern Illinois, is the home of Southern Illinois University. Here's what Nolan wrote to the Federal Reserve. Quote, in 1964, Jerry's Flower Shop opened, and for 35 years I've been a partner in the business. We're located in a university town, and our business depends on the university. Since the university budget's down and they're not spending, our business is suffering. We have streamlined our business as much as possible. We were forced to lay off one employee for a while, then brought her back at reduced pay and reduced hours. As a retail business, we have no choice but to accept credit and debit cards. We had to increase prices to cover the high interchange card fees. Even with a price increase, these high card fees are eating away our profit. Nolan concluded by saying, help our struggling business and other small businesses around the country. Reduce our swipe fees to 12 cents as proposed. Mr. President, he alludes to the fact that when the Federal Reserve took a look at the actual interchange fee being charged for the use of a debit card, they estimated the average to be over 40 cents per transaction, which is more than 1.1% of the value of each transaction. The actual cost, less than 10 cents. So what the credit and debit card companies are doing is imposing a fee that there's no bargain over, no competition, and no disclosure, and forcing retailers to pay it. Jerry's Flower Shop doesn't have a fighting chance against Visa and MasterCard. They have to pay it or else. And that is, of course, transferred to cost to customers and reduced profit to the owners. Here's another comment from Bob Stork. He owns Stark's Catering in Springfield, and I know Bob. Here's what he says. My business has been in operation for about 35 years. We're just a small enterprise with 5 employees. The economic situation has taken a toll on my business, but also on companies all across the country. Personally, I believe that swipe fees are hindering these struggling businesses even further. If these fees keep rising, they will eventually place such a strain on us, we may be forced to close our door. Please continue your efforts to regulate the debit swipe fees. Here's a comment from Norman Flynn. He has a Culligan water conditioning business in Macomb. Had it for over 70 years in his family. And he said, quote, we really cannot afford to keep getting hit with unnecessary fees. Please seek to get the proposed rule implemented quickly so that debit swipe fees will be lowered and small businesses will get some breathing room. And I hope my colleagues understand these small businesses need relief right now. They need to understand that delaying swipe fee reform, which a bill just introduced this week would do, would give Visa and MasterCard and the banks a multi-billion-dollar handout and would leave small businesses and consumers footing the bill. Mr. President, we've heard a lot about the bailout of Wall Street. This is the handout to Wall Street. To think that they would turn around and give to these companies $32 billion in a handout, most of it going to the largest banks and credit cards in America, by delaying this rule, is at the expense of small businesses and consumers all across America. As the big banks and card companies make their pitch, I hope my colleagues will make their choice to stand with Main Street instead of Wall Street. I hope they choose to stand on the side of hardworking small business owners. Most Americans understand, and I sure do, good jobs are created by small businesses all over this country. We've got to be on their side in the struggle and not on the side of the biggest banks and Wall Street. I want to respond to another argument raised recently against interchange reform. Banks like J.P. Morgan Chase have started threatening that interchange reform will force them to limit debit card transactions to $100 per transaction. This threat is so hollow, I'm amazed they're saying it publicly. It's a threat that defies basic logic. Remember, it doesn't cost a bank any more to conduct a $100 debit transaction than it does a $1 transaction. In both cases, the cardholder must already have the money in his account. The cost of transferring that money through the network's wires are the same no matter what the dollar amount. The only logical reason why banks like Chase would make this threat is to scare opposition to the interchange reform. Once reform takes effect, big banks like Chase would be crazy to follow through on this threat of imposing dollar limits on debit transactions. If they did, consumers will start moving in droves to small banks which are not regulated by this bill, and they will not impose any unnecessary restrictions. Chase also has no business to argue that they have to limit large dollar debit transactions because they're afraid about fraud. Remember, this is the same Chase Bank that last April told all its debit card holders not to use PIN numbers, even though PIN has 1/6 as much fraud loss as signature debit cards. Chase did this because Visa and MasterCard give higher interchange for signature debit than for PIN credit, for PIN debit. Chase is the poster child for banks that have brought increased fraud risk upon themselves by not using PIN numbers. I also want to respond to my colleagues who tell me they are hearing from banks and card companies that consumers might be hurt by interchange reform. First of all, these banks and card companies have no credibility when it comes to speaking on behalf of consumers. They say that interchange reform will force them to raise fees on consumers, but they won't even admit that they are already raising consumer fees to record levels before interchange reform passed. Glance back at the headlines like this. November 12, 2008, Wall Street Journal. Banks boost customer fees to record highs. May 28, 2009, USA Today. Banks find ways to boost fees, checking accounts' latest target. Banks and card companies also refuse to concede that consumers already bear the cost of interchange fees in the form of higher retail prices. That's particularly hard on the unbanked and low-income Americans. Instead of listening to banks and card companies about consumer interests, I suggest my colleagues listen to those consumer groups in Washington. Just this week, the Consumer Federation of America sent a letter to all senators. Here's what it said. The current interchange system is uncompetitive, non-transparent, and harmful to consumers. It is simply unjust to require less affluent Americans who do not participate in or benefit from the payment card or banking system to pay for excessive debit interchange fees that are passed through to the cost of goods and services. As a result, the Consumer Federation of America does not support delaying implementation of the new law. Other groups, such as the U.S. Public Interest Research Group, Public Citizen, and the Hispanic Institute have argued strongly that interchange reform will help consumers across America, just as it has helped consumers in many other countries that have undertaken reform. Mr. President, do you know what the interchange fee is in Canada? It's zero. The same companies that are offering debit cards here in the United States don't charge an interchange fee in Canada. And they have just recently reduced the interchange fees dramatically in Europe, much lower than the United States. Same companies. How can they do that? They did it because the governments of Europe stepped up and said, this is a ripoff. You can no longer impose unilaterally interchange fees, and we're going to regulate it. They said, please don't. We'll just drop the fees dramatically. And they did. Look what's happening here. We have a group of senators and congressmen who are now saying, we are not only refusing to assert the rights of consumers, we're going to back off and let the banks charge whatever they want for at least 2 more years. Whatever happened to our sensitivity to the people we're supposed to represent, the consumers and the small businesses? That, to me, is a troubling outcome if, in fact, those who push this legislation continue to do so. Mr. President, we all know the game plan that Visa, MasterCard, and the $13 trillion banking industry are using. We've seen it before. They will try to kill interchange reform outright using threats and scare tactics, but if they can't kill it, they'll try to delay it, praying that the next president or the next Congress will be even friendlier to the banking industry. We saw exactly the same thing happen when Congress passed the Credit Card Act in 2009. The banks and card companies fell all over themselves trying to raise fees before the rules went into effect. My wife, I used to come home on the weekends in Springfield, and she'd say to me, guess what? Here's another notice from the credit card company raising the interest rate that you have to pay on late charges. She said, I thought you passed credit card reform. And I said, it doesn't take effect for a few more months. And they're running as fast as they can to run up their fees in the meantime. That's what's happening to businesses with the interchange fees. And a lot of people don't know it because you don't get a notice in the mail about an interchange fee. That's been their game plan in the past. It's their game plan again. I don't think this is a game, though. I'm sick of the big banks and card companies squeezing American consumers and small businesses with tricks and traps and unfair fees. I'm going to stand with the small businesses and consumers of America on this issue. I'm going to fight the big banks and the big credit cards and their efforts to kill or delay swipe fee reform. I urge my colleagues to join me in standing up for Main Street and against the abusive fees and practices of Wall Street. Mr. President, I yield the floor and suggest the absence of
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Mr. President,
The senator from Illinois.
ask consent the quorum call be suspended.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that